Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final Ace of Rays podcast episode of the 2025 season. The Tampa Bay Rays are not off to October baseball after having been eliminated about a week and a half ago, and being well out of the playoff picture as far ago as July, early August. Um, so the Tampa Bay Rays finished the season 77 and 85, 8 games below 500, 17 games back of the Toronto Blue Jays for the division, and 10 games back of a wild card spot. Yes, double-digit amount of games out of a wild card spot, which to me screams not even close. Um, Again, 8 games below 500, despite all that, plus 31 run differential. A winning record at home by 1 game, 41 and 40. Just 9 games below 500 on the road, and 13 games below 500 against teams with a winning record. So that is how this season came about. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what went right for the Tampa Bay Rays this year and what went wrong for them. Because believe it or not, some things actually did go better than last year. The record, no. But there are some key stats, I think, that are worth mentioning. So I'll give you the good stuff first, and then we'll talk about what went wrong, because I know that's sort of the mood right now. What went wrong for the second year in a row? We missed the playoffs. Come on now, like what is it going to take? Um, but what went right? First off, the team batting average finished the season at 251, which was ninth in the MLB. Ninth in the MLB, most of the time will qualify you for a postseason spot. Their batting average with runners in scoring position, something that I would not have predicted to improve by the amount that it did, was 266, which was seventh in the MLB. They were almost, if not dead last, and really close to it last year. They were horrible with runners in scoring position. This year, they finished seventh in the MLB with runners in scoring position. That'll qualify you for the playoffs in just about any division. Um, they were third in the MLB in double plays turned, so good defense. They led the league in stolen bases, and it wasn't even close. The margin was about 30 over the Milwaukee Brewers. And the starting lineup was, on paper, really good. Using yesterday's lineup, not yesterday, 2 days ago's lineup, because yesterday's lineup was, a little wacky. Kevin Cash did his big one and put Richie Palacios in the leadoff spot, and it actually worked, so that's pretty cool. Um, but just using the lineup from game 161, Chandler Simpson leading off, 295 average, second in the MLB in stolen bases this season. Yandy Diaz hit the 300 mark, 25 home runs on top of that, and 847 OPS leading the team, and I think 20th in the MLB. Not the only one who was top 25 in the MLB in OPS on this team. Brandon Lau, 31 home runs, 256 average, not bad. Junior Caminero, 45 home runs in his first full season as a Tampa Bay Ray, 264 average, not bad. Jonathan Aranda, who was having an MVP caliber season, not that he would have won it, but he was up there. He would have probably gotten a nomination as a finalist if he was healthy the whole season. Unfortunately, he wasn't. But he finished with a 316 average and 14 home runs and was just all around. He was a doubles machine early in the year, and that's really what the Rays kind of needed, especially in May and June when he was going off. The Rays were going good. Let's skip Christopher Morel, who batted sixth 2 days ago. But then you go to Jake Mangum, who was batting seventh with a 296 average and 27 stolen bases. That's all pretty good. So how does a team with a starting lineup like that has everything that you need on paper, power, hit for average, speed, stealing bases, OPS, everything that you need, how does that team miss the playoffs? This is perplexing to people. It's not perplexing to me at all. Like I said in the last episode, the eye test. You know, a lot of those big numbers came in games that they won by 10, 11 runs on a smaller basis, 5 or 6 runs, at times when they didn't need that support. When at other times when they really did need that support, They didn't get it. Um, the Rays were 22 and 29 in one-run games, which was the worst win percentage in the American League East. The worst win percentage in the American League East in one-run games. The team OPS, despite a lot of good averages on the team, the OPS was 714, which was tied 14th in the MLB. That's out of a playoff spot, no matter where you're at. Second in the MLB in caught stealing. Chandler Simpson actually leads the MLB in caught stealing. And despite a higher average with runners in scoring position, the slugging was still only 401, which was 15th in the MLB. Jonathan Aranda was injured the entire um, last 2/3 of the season after the trade deadline, so that hurt the Rays at the plate. Brandon Lau was injured a lot in July. That was kind of something that you don't even really remember too much now, but that was a big reason why the Rays weren't winning games, was because Brandon Lau wasn't in the lineup in July, most of July. Um, the team ERA was 3.94, which was 15th in the MLB, and now you get into the real reasons why the Rays weren't in a playoff spot. The starters' ERA was 4.03, also 15th in the MLB. The relievers were 3.81, which was actually only 12th in the MLB. We'll talk about the bullpen in a second because there's more to that than meets the eye. But the rotation just wasn't good enough for a team that you would expect to make the playoffs. You had Drew Rasmussen, who was basically the ace of the team, had a 2.76 ERA, but at the same time, in his 31 starts this season, he only pitched into the sixth inning 11 times. So he was only in his 31 starts. I'll give him credit. He was a pitcher of record in 15 of those starts, and he was 10 and 5. But only 10 wins in 31 starts is not going to get you into the postseason for your ace. Um, Not that that's necessarily his fault, because he didn't necessarily come into the season expecting to be the ace. That was going to be Shane McClanahan, who was injured the entire season. Did not pitch after spring training. So the real kind of ace was Ryan Pepio. He was the guy that started on opening day. He started every 5-6 days after that for the duration of the season, except for a couple times when he dealt with soreness or something. But regardless, 3.86 ERA, which is not going to be good enough for your ace, or even your second best pitcher if you want to make the postseason. Shane Baz had a 4.87 ERA, which is not good enough for the major leagues, and that still leaves me scratching my head as to why the Rays decided they were going to trade Jeffrey Springs to Oakland and keep Shane Baz. Because even dating back to last year, Jeffrey Springs was better than Shane Baz. When he came back, he was instantly there. Location wasn't an issue. This year, Shane Baz could not locate and left too many balls over the center of the plate and walked too many batters. And with Oakland this year, Jeffrey Springs, granted, it's not perfect. It's a 4.11 ERA, but compared to, 480 level, 487, not good enough to be in the rotation consistently. That's all you're getting are outs, and that's after giving up 3-4 runs, sometimes 5 or 6 runs in an outing. Zach Littell, who was kind of the fourth pitcher in line until the trade deadline, had a 3.58 ERA, but it was a hot and cold 3.58 ERA, where sometimes he'd come out and dominate, sometimes he wouldn't, and he would give up 5-6 runs in a given game. Kevin Catch would also pull him after 5 innings and 70 pitches of work and turn it over to the bullpen, who would promptly blow it. Happened multiple times this season. Taj Bradley, who had a 4.61 ERA and ended his career with the Rays on a really sour note. I think he gave up 8 or 9 runs in his last appearance. Got optioned to AAA and then traded at the deadline as well. Adrian Hauser, who came in from the Chicago White Sox and had a fantastic ERA, 2.11, 2.20 era, I think. Finished with a lot higher of an ERA, and his ERA with the Rays was 4.79. Not good. Joe Boyle, 4.67 ERA. And Ian Seymour, who had a 2.85 ERA until today, and if you want to give him a pass for today, then go ahead. I don't know. What do you take out of a game 162 when you've got nothing on the line? Um, Ian Seymour had a 2.85 ERA, but only pitched 53 and two-thirds innings, and only 22 and a third as a starter, in which he had a 1.21 ERA until yesterday. Sorry, yesterday. I'm recording this on Sunday, in case you can't tell. Um, Now, after yesterday's game, an ERA of 3.63. I mean, sure, not horrible, especially it's his first season. He was a reliever most of the season, and it was his first season really with the Rays, and he went from reliever to starter. So, give him credit. But he didn't have a lot of work. The bullpen. Everybody wants to talk about the bullpen. Why does everybody want to talk about the bullpen? What did the bullpen do wrong this year? In fact, the bullpen had a better ERA than the starters did. They had a 3.81 ERA. Um, More than meets the eye there. More than meets the eye. Pete Fairbanks this season, 5 blown saves, losses in 4 additional appearances. Garrett Clevenger, 4 blown saves, losses in 4 additional appearances. Edwin Uceda, 5 blown saves, and he lost 2 additional appearances. Brian Baker had a 4.66 ERA as a Ray and blew 3 saves as a Ray. So if you add up all of that, the Rays, you know, they also were tied third in most blown saves in the MLB with 28, so that kind of kills you. Between those 4 pitchers that I just mentioned, that is a total of 17 blown saves. Those are your high leverage pitchers. Those are the pitchers that the Rays were relying on to get the job done in the 8th and ninth innings. And 17 blown saves, if you win half of those games instead, you're at least in, fighting for a postseason spot going into the last weekend. And again, this past weekend, maybe the Rays don't get swept if they have something to play for. That puts you at somewhere around 85, 86 wins if those blown saves, some of them don't happen. Half of them don't happen. Aside from that, Mason Montgomery, who was up and down this season, 5.67 ERA. Kevin Kelly had a 5.90 ERA, which was actually 4.21 before yesterday, and that's criminal to have a 5.90 ERA on a major league roster, and to continuously put that person in the 8th and ninth innings, mostly 7th and 8th actually, of key games, one-run games that were, um, you know within reach, or even if the Rays were trailing, right? They were trailing by 1 or 2 runs. Kevin Kelly would be the guy to come in, and it would be blown open, and the Rays wouldn't have a chance at the next time they came to bat. And aside from that, you had a rotating cast of characters from AAA with high ERAs who were kind of footnotes on the season. And I'm going to give you PTSD by just giving you their names. Forrest Whitley, remember him? Paul Gervais, remember him? Yeah, that was this season. That was like June, July. Um, and again, tied for third most blown saves in the MLB and a 22 and 29 record in one-run games, which was the worst percentage in the AL East. That'll do that to you. Those 2 stats alone, that'll do that to you. You won't make the postseason with those stats. In fact, of the teams, and that might even be a little behind because the where I found that from, which was BetMGM, um, this was updated a week before the end of the season. The Rays were third on this list, tied with the Rangers and the Red Sox at the time. The Red Sox are the only team in the top 5 on this list who made the playoffs. Below that were the Mets, who didn't make the playoffs. And above the Rays were the Angels and Diamondbacks, who also did not make the playoffs. The Rays had a save percentage of 56%. That will not get you in the postseason. At least with the next team in line, the Red Sox, who blew 28 saves, the same amount as the Rays, they had a save percentage of 61%. The Phillies and the Mariners, who weren't far behind, 26 and 25 respectively, 63% save percentage. Even the Toronto Blue Jays, who had Jeff Hoffman, who blew a lot of saves this year. I think one of the most in the MLB. Had a save percentage of 63%. That's kind of where you want to be. That's pretty good. Um, you're not going to make the playoffs with, blowing 28 saves and having a save percentage of 56% and not being able to win one-run games, which a lot of that is on the offense. They weren't getting the key hits at the key times. I said that in the last episode. They were not getting hits when they needed hits. They were getting hits in blowout wins over, um, you know, Detroit and Baltimore. And I'm trying to think of some of the other blowout wins this season. Toronto earlier in the season, Houston. They were scoring 16 runs at the most, sometimes 14 15 runs in a game, and then would turn around and lose the next one 1-0. They split a series with the Houston Astros earlier this season, and I found that series indicative of how the entire season went, where they were playing the Houston Astros in Houston. They won the first game of that series 13-3. They dropped the second one 2-1. They won the third game of that series 16-3, and then they lost the fourth and final game of that series 1-0. So in that series, the Rays outscored Houston. Let me see if I can do math real quick. 30 to 9. The Rays outscored Houston 30-9 in that 4-game series, and that series split. Now you ask about how the Rays had a run differential of plus 31 and missed the postseason by 10 games and were 8 games under 500. That was indicative of the whole season. The whole season went like that. The other one I can think of at the top of my mind is the Detroit series, the home Detroit series, where the Rays beat them 14-8. Actually it felt more of a blowout than maybe that actually was, because Detroit was down, I think, 14-5 at some point in that game. In the second game of that series, they beat them 8-3. That was solid. And then in the final game of that series, they lost 9-3, courtesy of Garrett Clevenger and then one of those rotating cast of characters who the Rays brought in from AAA and other organizations. Forrest Whitley gave up 6 runs, and then the game got rain delayed. I remember that one. You win 2 of 3, okay, great, but you got crushed in the last one. So you can win these blowout games by 6 runs or 5 runs in the second game, but try to win a 1-run game in the last game of that series, and then see if that's a little bit different. The Baltimore series was another one. They later that same month in June, this was where it all started to go downhill for the Rays. They lost the first game of that series 22-8. They won the second one 11-3. They lost the final game of that series 5-1. It's just back and forth. That's why they didn't make the postseason. They were losing a lot of these series and a lot of these games by either 1 run, or they were winning the series handedly and then losing by a fair amount, sometimes 1 run, sometimes more in the duration of the series. The Boston series is another good one when it really started to go downhill for the Rays. Got swept by Boston. 3 of the 4 games in that series were 1-run losses. One of them was a walk-off. I was there. That was fun. So yeah, that's why the Tampa Bay Rays are not in the postseason. That's why they finished with a worse record than last season, despite looking better, I would say, this year. And that's why, they weren't even close. They were 10 games out from a playoff spot. Not even close. So, your final Devil Rays advocate of the season. Is it time for a full rebuild? It's worth asking the question. But what does a full rebuild really mean, right? Like, does anybody really want that in terms of, look at the hitting core right now. I mean, that's only going to get better. The core is here, right? We're not looking at AAA anymore for answers, right? Like, oh, it's going to be different when Simpson and Mangum and Williams and Caminero and Aranda come up. Although nobody was saying that about Aranda last year because fans were quite negative about Aranda, but they're here. They've played in the MLB now. And aside from Carson Williams, they've played really good in the MLB. Williams had the great debut, probably one of the best debuts in MLB history. Um, but still finished the season with like a 160 something average. Um, he'll get better. That's not a knock on him. I think they just need to shine a little brighter in the big moments. I think that's where it was lacking. I mean, Simpson did show up when they needed him to, and despite leading the MLB in caught stealing, I think he stole something like 48 total bases this season, which was second only to Jose Caballero, who spent most of the season as a Tampa Bay Ray. Um, and both of them led the MLB in stolen bases this season. So that's why the Rays ultimately finished there. Chandler Simpson stole 44 bases this season, tied with Jose Ramirez. Still pretty good. 44 stolen bases, and you only get caught stealing 12 times. That's a pretty good ratio right there. And I'm sure that next year Simpson will cut down on those caught stealings. It was his rookie season. Give Mangum, give Williams some time. Caminero is fully developed. This is a Caminero you're going to see for years to come. Jonathan Aranda, you only hope that he can be as good next season as he was this season, because like he's still a pretty young guy too. You don't know, that guy could win an MVP award at some point. I'm serious. I know Aaron Judge exists. Okay, I get it. But if Aaron Judge ever had a down season, if Aaron Judge had a down season this year in an alternate universe and Aranda stayed healthy and finished with the numbers that he had, he would realistically very much be in the conversation for MVP. Oh, Cal Raleigh with 60 something homer. Yeah, okay. I'm saying conversation. Cal Raleigh, Jonathan Aranda, Aaron Judge. The three of them would have been the top three for MVP if Aranda stayed healthy the entire season. He's the only one that's not on that list because he wasn't healthy most of the season and because he plays in Tampa Bay and, media coverage, whatever. Um, but everybody else out of that core five group, Simpson, Mangum, Aranda, Williams, and Caminero, they've established themselves except for Williams. But he'll improve. I think he'll improve. And if those players play as good at minimum as they did this season and better next season, then why would you do? What are you rebuilding? The like, how would you go about that? Would you trade any of those players? Hell no. That would be the dumbest idea you could do. You have a group of players who shine really bright, and not even on that list, Yandy Diaz and Brandon Lau, who had great seasons. Especially Yandy Diaz. Again, finished with 25 homers and a 300 average and an 847 OPS. Like, that's pretty good. You've got the veterans, you've got the core group of young guys. You've got a lineup that realistically, in another year or two, could be one of the best in the MLB. Runners in scoring position was so much better this year than it was last year. It was night and day, the improvement. The team batting average was ninth in the MLB. The batting average with runners in scoring position was seventh in the MLB. So it's there. It's just they need to shine in those bigger moments. The one-run game record is what killed them this season. If in those 29 games that they lost by one run, they could have found a way to win 10 of them, flip the script by 10 games, then they're 87 and 75, and they're tied with the Tigers for the final wild card spot. Um, can't tell you that tiebreaker because they split that season series, but whatever, doesn't matter. Um, but yeah, they're in if they win some of those one-run games, or if in those 17 blown saves, three of them weren't blown, and they go into the final weekend with something to play for against Toronto, a team that they swept earlier in the season. The rotation, I think, can get by on a couple of tweaks. I think Rasmussen, he did pitch 16 less innings than Ryan Pepio, who was, I guess, technically the ace. If he can pitch as much or more in 2026, if he can pitch into the sixth inning more than 11 times, if we can get that to 20 times, If he can be the pitcher of record in 20, 25 games next season, ideally as the winning pitcher in 15 of them or more, then that's good improvement. That's exactly what you want from an ace. I mean, the Detroit Tigers got by on Tarek Skubal and Casey Mize this year. You've got your, Casey Mize and Drew Rasmussen. I'm not going to go as far and say Tarek Skubal, um, but like you've got your ace. Casey Mize could be an ace on most MLB teams, just FYI. If Ian Seymour as well can build on what he had kind of done towards the end of the season, not including yesterday's game I think was an anomaly. And if he can become part of the regular rotation, if he has those same sorts of numbers that 121 ERA is a starter overall, you don't need that. The 285 overall ERA I think is good enough. 285 ERA for a second pitcher in line. If that pitcher pitches 150 innings in a season, they're making the postseason. If you can rely on those guys in days 1 and 2, Rasmussen and Seymour, you're making the postseason. But I still think, they're in a position right now where they need to spend some money on another starter this offseason. This looks a little bit to me like 2017, where the core is coming together, but it's not quite there yet in the rotation. And even in the starting lineup as well, although that was a different story because they won 90 games and then rebuilt their starting lineup anyway. Um, but they're in a position where they've got good pitchers. This was more of a development season for them, and then next year should be the year where they make that next step. And hopefully Drew Rasmussen can be part of that ace squad. Hopefully he's the guy that pitches opening day if Shane McClanahan can't. But in 2019, this team gave Charlie Morton a $15 million a year contract. He was 35 years old at the time. He came in and he was the ace of the rotation and led the Rays to a playoff spot and led the Rays to ultimately a spot in the World Series in 2 years. And it's 2 years in Tampa. Pretty fantastic. And of course, he was part of another rotation of, Tyler Glass now when he was healthy and Blake Snell when he was healthy. 2019 was actually kind of a down season for Blake Snell. But, they brought Charlie Morton in and plugged some holes, and then they were good. And they made the playoffs. And they won the wild card game on the road. And they stuck it to Houston, who lost in the World Series in 7 games that year. And were cheating, but beside the point. Um, I'm not going to give you I'll give you one specific name. I think Steven Matz might be a good fit in Tampa, but there are a plethora of pitchers in that sort of 32 to 37-year-old range that if the Rays brought him in, you could see similar results as you did with Charlie Morton. Um, I don't think that we should bank on Brody Hopkins the way that I banked on Yaniel Kuret this year. At the start of the year, I really thought that Kuret would be in the rotation by the end of the season. He has struggled immensely in AAA. He struggled in AA at the start of the season as well. But if the goal is to make the playoffs in 2026, spend some money. Get another starter. Just one. Just one starter this offseason. Because if you have a rotation next year where Rasmussen is as good as he was this season, Ian Seymour takes the next step and has, somewhere in the range of a 3 ERA. Ryan Pepio is your third guy and is a little more consistent, ideally. Bring in another pitcher, and you've got 4 quality pitchers right there. And then you hope that Shane Baz can, figure out location. It's not a bad idea, right? And you can get by on 4 pitchers, especially in the playoffs. You only need 4 pitchers in the playoffs. You put Shane Baz in the bullpen in the postseason if you get in next year. Assuming, he doesn't drastically improve and then come in at Cy Young caliber next year, but you never know. The bullpen is where things need to change. Sure. If you want to talk about a full rebuild, the one place you have to rebuild is the bullpen. This team last year, 2024, shipped off half of its roster prior to the trade deadline to make room for Edwin Uceda and Manuel Rodriguez, who were, if you remember, fantastic for the Rays in 2024. And in 2025 as well, Uceda struggled a little at the beginning, found his form as the season went on. Don't think about yesterday. Yesterday, again, was an anomaly. Manuel Rodriguez, unfortunately, injury issues, but you've got somebody like Eric Orzi, who's just sitting in AAA, who was great for the Rays this season when he was here. Um, don't understand why he wasn't on this roster a majority of the season. I mean, again, you had Tyler Alexander and Aaron Savali last year, and the Rays traded both of them so they could make room for Edwin Uceda and Manuel Rodriguez. And there was another name on that list that I'm forgetting. Um, why keep Kevin Kelly in that situation? Why not trade Kevin Kelly to make room for Eric Orzi? That's just such a joke to me. Maybe the season goes different if you're not worrying about a 5.21, then a 5.90 ERA in one of your seventh to eighth inning relievers. Eric Orzi was fantastic again when he was up for the Rays this season. Either way, you need more bullpen arms in free agency. You need to go into free agency and look for some relievers. It's not really happening in AAA except for Eric Orzi, so you got to find somebody major league ready if the goal is to make the playoffs in 2026. Now, the one thing I will say is that the Rays were not alone in the collapse that they had this season. This was the weirdest season in MLB history that featured the largest comeback to win a division in the history of Major League Baseball. The Cleveland Guardians were 15 and a half back of the Detroit Tigers at one point and came back to win the division on a tiebreaker. The Tigers, specifically on June 28th. That's the day I'm going to pull because the MLB looked a lot different on June 28th than it does now. Exactly 3 months prior to the day I'm recording this episode, which is September 28th. On June 28th, the Rays were within half a game of the New York Yankees, not the Toronto Blue Jays, for the division lead. The Yankees ultimately fell to about 5 games behind the Blue Jays, I think, at one point, before kind of clawing their way back towards the end of the season. Ultimately, the Blue Jays get it on the tiebreaker. On that same day, the Tigers were 10 and a half games ahead of Cleveland, who was sub 500 at the time. The Houston Astros were ahead of Seattle by 6.5 games. I think actually that day, that June 28th, that might have been the day that I actually saw Cleveland lose 5-0 to St. Louis. And they looked horrible in that game, all around. Sonny Gray pitched a complete game against them. So, and then I went to Detroit, and the next day saw the Detroit Tigers absolutely destroy the Minnesota Twins. So it's really shocking that Cleveland wound up winning that division. Like where they were at that point in the season looked like two completely different teams. Um, on that same day, Houston Astros were ahead of Seattle by 6.5 games. Houston didn't make the playoffs. Seattle won the division and got a first round bye. Um, the New York Mets were within half a game of the Philadelphia Phillies. They missed the playoffs entirely. The Cincinnati Reds, who were fourth in the division at the time, beat the Mets out for that final wild card spot on a tiebreaker again. The Chicago Cubs were leading the National League Central. Ultimately, the Milwaukee Brewers won that division and had the best winning percentage, the most amount of wins in the MLB, clinched the division and a first round bye and home field advantage through the World Series. And the Los Angeles Dodgers, even, they were leading the National League, the entire National League, by 2.5 games over the Chicago Cubs, who again wound up not even winning the National League Central. The Los Angeles Dodgers were up 2.5 games over them and didn't even get a first round bye. Every division leader or anybody who was even close on June 28th, not a single one of them won the division except for the Phillies and the Dodgers. That's pretty crazy. I mean, again, Mets within half a game of the Phillies missed the playoffs. Dodgers looking like they're going on to the best record in the MLB, 20 games over 500 on June 28th. Don't even get the first round bye. Lose it to Milwaukee and Philly, who Milwaukee was in a wild card spot at the time. Or they might have even been on the outside looking in at the time because they weren't very good until like August. Um, yeah, Milwaukee they would have just been in ahead of the San Diego Padres, but behind the New York Mets by half a game, and they wound up winning the entire National League. So it was a really wacky season. The Rays were not the only team to collapse. The Detroit Tigers collapsed. The Houston Astros collapsed. The New York Mets collapsed, but that's kind of normal. The teams that were leading the divisions at the time, except for the Phillies, wound up not basically performing as well as they'll tell you they should have the second half of the season. New York Yankees are one of them. They wound up losing the division, and now they have to play the Boston Red Sox in a dogfight of a wild card round. The Los Angeles Dodgers, again, first round bye, it was right there, and they didn't get it. That was 3 months ago. So a lot can change, and a lot of teams did collapse. There were teams that were close to a wild card spot that wound up not making the playoffs. The San Francisco Giants were right outside, or they might have even been, yeah, they were right outside of the playoff picture at 45 and 38, and didn't even come close. The St. Louis Cardinals were 8 games above 500. Didn't really come close either. Um, Minnesota, they were only 3 games below 500. But at the same time, the Boston Red Sox, they were 2 games below 500 on that day. They wound up making the playoffs as a second wild card team. Cleveland, a game below 500, go on to win the division. Seattle Mariners, only 2 games above 500, win the American League West and get a first round bye. It's just a wacky season. It was just a wacky season overall. Nothing that happened this season made sense. The Boston Red Sox shipped off arguably their biggest star, and the second that they did that, got really hot and surged to a playoff spot. San Francisco Giants spent all this money this offseason and didn't even come close to a playoff spot. The Arizona Diamondbacks were sellers at the deadline and came really close to making the playoffs. So, I don't know. It was a wacky season. It'll probably be a really wacky postseason too. I wouldn't be surprised if you get a World Series between like, I don't know, the Reds and the Red Sox or something. I mean, any team on this list um, of teams that are in the postseason, I think have a really good chance at the World Series. Except maybe Detroit, but you never know. You get hot at the right time. Detroit is known for being hot and cold, so could be. You never know. The Reds, maybe. They won 7 out of their last 10. They beat the Brewers in a series, who had the best record in the National League, and were fighting for the first seed until the final day, basically, in which they actually won on the final day of the season. So it'll be an interesting postseason. I might even watch some of it. I don't think I've watched much postseason baseball last. Well, I didn't watch any last year because the Rays weren't in it, and I wasn't planning on watching this year if the Rays weren't in it. But you could see some really funky stuff happening here, so maybe I will. Who knows? For the last time, highlight hitter, which I'm gonna say for all of 2025, the highlight hitter this year was Junior Caminero. You had a lot of good hitters on this team this year. Yandy Diaz was really good. Brandon Lau hit a bunch of home runs, over 30 home runs for the second time in his career. Was an American League All-Star. Um, this team, at the time that the All-Star voting was taking place, should have had 4 players voted into the All-Star game. If you think about Aranda, Diaz, Lau, and Caminero, the seasons they were having, Four of them should have easily, those four should have been in the All-Star game at that point in the season. And that still bothers me that it took players not participating in the All-Star game to get any of them there. That was crazy to me. And the players voting in, because thankfully the MLB at least allowed the players to have some say. People that actually understand the sport and who's good and who's not. Fan voting is just horrible. They need to really do away with that next year. But yeah, your highlight hitter for the year is Junior Caminero, because in his first full season as a Tampa Bay Ray at the age of 22 years old, he had 45 home runs, which was one shy of the Rays' single season record. He was the runner-up in the 2025 MLB Home Run Derby. He played in 154 games this season. That means he only didn't play in 8. What kind of there are not many MLB players that have that kind of endurance in this era of load management and whatever else. Over 162 games, Junior Caminero was at third base for all but 8 of them. That's crazy. Had 110 RBIs, had an OPS of 846, which was 21st in the MLB, which was actually better than guys that are getting paid a ton more than him, like Bryce Harper, and almost equal with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And again, he's 22 years old. This was his rookie season, basically. Like, he played in 2023 a little bit. He played in 2024, especially towards the end of the season, but he was sort of still developing. This was his first full season as a Ray, and he almost broke records, like big records that'll stand the test of time. And who knows, maybe next year he does break that home run record. Maybe next year he gets to 50. Primetime pitcher, that one's also easy. That one actually is easy for me. This isn't as hard as highlight hitter, because, I mean, you could go almost any way with that. Yandy Diaz could easily be in that conversation as well as the Rays' most effective hitter this past year. But the primetime pitcher is easy for me. Drew Rasmussen. In his first season back, his first full season back from elbow surgery that kept him out of the league for a year and a half, and then when he returned, he didn't pitch more than 2 innings in the last 2 months of last season. He comes back as a starter this year, and even though he only gets to the 6th inning 11 times, he started 31 games this season. He pitched 150 total innings. In those 150 innings, he had a 2.76 ERA. He had a 127 strikeouts and a 1.02 WHIP, which is pretty amazing. He was an American League All-Star as well. That deserves some, a lot of credit. Give credit to Drew Rasmussen. The times that the Rays were struggling were the times that Drew Rasmussen, they had him out there for like 2 or 3 innings. And then they turned it over to Joe Boyle for no real reason that I can discern. Load management, maybe, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, let's turn our attention to next year, right? If we're thinking about next year and we're thinking about how the Rays going to make the playoffs, it's pretty easy. The bullpen needs to be revamped entirely, and the rotation needs another arm or two. And I think that next year is going to be very critical, the first 2 months of the season, in determining who keeps their jobs and who doesn't. Because realistically, Kyle Snyder, who has been the Rays pitching coach for years and has, made names out of this pitching staff that has operated on no budget at all, this year struggled pretty heavily compared to previous seasons. And there were also some very boneheaded decisions, I think, made on the part of the pitching coach and Kevin Cash, which I think cost the Rays a fair amount of games this season. I don't think there were many decisions that they made that led to Rays wins, you know? And the one-run games show you that. 22 and 29 in one-run games. That's 7 games under 500. They finished 8 games under 500. I hope I'm wrong, but I would not be surprised if Linares is the manager at some point next season, interim manager. I hope I'm wrong. There is a world where the Rays come out guns blazing, just like they did in 2023, or even just like they have in many of the years that they made the postseason, where they come out and they win games, and they do it sometimes handedly, but sometimes they slug it out in these one-run games, and they ultimately get back to the 90-win mark and make the postseason. It's a realistic possibility. They just need to spend money this offseason. And I was talking with some people who aren't Rays fans earlier today and said basically what I would do for this team to be 15th in the MLB in payroll. The Rays did so much over the course of the time where they were regularly making the postseason on such a small budget. They were playing Moneyball like you've never seen before. And they made a World Series. They won 100 games. They were the best team in baseball until their shortstop was a pedophile in 2023 and their ace had to get Tommy John surgery. There were so many. I mean, if the final wild card spot existed in 2018, I truly believe the Rays would have won the World Series that year. They swept the Boston Red Sox, who actually did win the World Series that year, in late August, and it wasn't even close. And then, 2019 is the first year they make the postseason. They look good. Maybe if that Houston game 5, goes another way, they have a chance. Who knows? I don't think so. I don't think that's a year I'd consider, them to have the chance to win the World Series. In 2020, they come that close. They lose it in 6. They could have come right back the next year with the same group, and I really do think they would have won it. You keep Travis d'Arnaud and Charlie Morton, but they didn't win the World Series in 2018 or 2021. But those are the 2 years I would contend that if things were different, if the MLB had the rules that they do now, or if, the Rays had made smarter decisions about how they were managing free agency in 2020, that the Rays would have won the World Series. If not in 2018, then at least in 2021. It was right there. And I can prove it because Charlie Morton and Travis d'Arnaud actually did win the World Series with the Atlanta Braves, who won less games than the Rays that season by a significant amount, like 14 games behind the Rays, and they won the World Series. Because it's all about, having the right talent, having the veteran experience, the emotional maturity, and getting hot at the right time. But regardless, they made the playoffs in 2022. They got I don't know. I don't remember if they got swept that year. I know they lost to Cleveland. 2023, they got swept by the Rangers after a 99 win season. I mean, but even in those years, like they weren't getting to 99 wins with a heavy payroll. They weren't going out and getting big name free agents. This offseason, was there a single doubt in your mind, or was there even a thought that the Rays could potentially be in on Juan Soto? Like, in any sort of reality? I mean, there were people who thought he could wind up as a Milwaukee Brewer for a time. The Milwaukee Brewers didn't get Juan Soto, and Juan Soto didn't make the playoffs with the New York Mets, and the Milwaukee Brewers did make the playoffs. But what I'm saying is that the teams that you even can think of as, okay, they might go after this free agent. If they don't get that free agent, okay, let's go after another big name free agent instead. Let's bring them in and see if we can make something here. And the Blue Jays are a perfect example of that because they actually did it. They brought in a lot of guys over the past few years. I mean, George Springer, that was a pretty big ad for them. And of course, they've got the core, they've got Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but they made the postseason on a mix of everything. Max Scherzer, Jeff Hoffman, like, those were free agents. Imagine if the Rays brought in Max Scherzer last year, not this year. We don't know. We don't know. If Max Scherzer, he's a ticking time bomb. Any year he could be the last full season. We'll see. But there are some good starting pitchers. There are some good relief pitchers that the Rays could get in free agency. So opening day is in 178 days, and in that time, the Rays will have an off season. Free agency will open up. Hopefully, the Rays will spend some money. And then 25 weeks and 3 days from now, when the Rays take the field in St. Louis, hopefully they'll have a team that is capable of making the postseason. I didn't even talk about some of the things that went wrong with positions this year. I mean, they had a good catcher in Danny Jansen, and because they weren't going to make the postseason, they traded him at the deadline. And they brought in a shortstop to plug in that hole this offseason. And he played like 10 games and then got DFA'd. So, hopefully if they, do go out and get free agents, hopefully they're a little smarter about it next year. But anyways, that's going to be it for this season. If there is anything over the winter, I'll make an Ace of Rays video about it. Free agent signings, trades, where the Rays are going from there. Maybe not a full podcast episode, but maybe just a sit down video of, all right, well, here's this player that the Rays got. Let's talk about it. How's he going to improve the team? But anyways, that is going to be it for this video and it for this season. I'm still going to be on this channel because I've got 150 different things going on right now. This is the part of the year right now where I transition from baseball to hockey. I am a Philadelphia Flyers season ticket holder. I live in the Philadelphia region. And so I'm going to be making a lot of Flyers content that's similarly themed. So yeah, be on the lookout for that if you care. Some of you are Lightning fans, and that's cool too. As long as you're not a Panthers fan, LOL. Anyways, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you guys very much for watching, and until next season, or my next upload, which is like 2 days from now. Peace out, broskies.